3, 2, 1, we're live.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the Monday, March 21st, 2022 regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting. As always, please silence your phones. Take a second, check them, so we don't have any ringers going off. And when you're done with that, I invite you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. Hatfield, let's start with roll call.
Roll call. President McFarland.
Here.
Vice President Roush.
Here.
Secretary Hatfield's here. Treasurer Lauterbach.
Here.
Member Baker.
Here.
Member Blasey.
Here.
Member Frazee.
Here.
All accounted for.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay. All right, let's move into the consent agenda. Item 2.1 is the approval of minutes from February 28th, 2022. Item 2.2 is a list of staff who have announced their resignation and effective dates. Item 2.3 is a list of teachers who are recommended for employment. Item 2.4 is approval of the school system's bills in the amount of $7,627,799. Item 2.5 is approval for legal payments to the Troon Law Firm in the amount of $5,335.50 and to Posner, Dyer, K&R, Shefsky, Thompson, PLC for $800 dated March 1, 2022.
Make a motion to approve items 2.1 through 2.5 on the consent agenda.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Roush, support by Mr. Hatfield. Any further discussion regarding the consent agenda items? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving on, we are in item 3, presentation. Board of Education Matters, presentations to the board. This is 3.1 Shining Stars. Mike.
Tiala, if you'd come join me. As she walks up, I'll share all kinds of good information about you, Tiala. Tiala joined MPS team in 2019 as a classroom teacher at Adams Elementary. This school year, she is teaching 3rd grade to Adams. Tiala earned the Bachelor of Arts degree in elementary education from Saginaw Valley State University. Tiala was nominated for her Shining Star by an MPS colleague and an MPS parent who commented, to support students in academics, as well as their social and emotional well-being is a daunting task. MBS has an abundance of teachers that are good at this. However, Tiala is a master at it. My son is a 3rd grade student in her class at Adams. From the first day of school, she has dug deep to get to know my son, to have a firm understanding of what he needs to be successful. He has had academic, social, and emotional difficulty in school. Ms. Warzinski has been determined to connect with him in a way that makes him feel comfortable enough to take risks in class. He trusts her because she put building relationships with him a priority to ensure he and all of his students receive whatever it is that helps them find success. She truly understands her students and they feel loved, accepted, and supported in her classroom. Congratulations, Talent.
Thank you.
And our next Shining Star is Beth Haller, if she would join me. And same thing, Beth, I'm going to talk about you a little bit first, okay? Beth joined the MPS team in 2016 as a paraprofessional at Seabird Elementary School. Before coming to MPS, Beth was a behavior tech at the Autism Center of Michigan. Beth earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree in elementary education from Michigan State University. Beth was nominated for a Shining Star by an MPS colleague who commented, Beth goes above and beyond the role of being a paraprofessional. She promotes kindness throughout the school by displaying artwork that she makes. She takes the initiative to organize the other paraprofessional schedules, which includes the complicated lunch and recess duty and the specific student para placements. She took the proper steps to become a substitute teacher to cover any teacher at Seabird who unexpectedly has to leave. Beth is definitely a team player, leading with kindness and compassion and pride in what she does. best dedication to the students at Siebert and the extra time and her effort she spends in our building is sincerely appreciated. Congratulations, Beth.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on, we have item 3.2. This is a joint presentation on ESSER funds. Mr. Bruton and Ms. Miller-Nelson.
Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate you allowing us to speak this evening on ESSER funds. Penny and I are going to split this, and I'm going to speak more to the financial compliance side, and Penny is going to speak this evening more to the planning and implementation stages that we've had. So while we could speak for hours and hours and hours on all that is ESSER-related funds, we're going to try and keep this a little bit higher level. But of course, anytime that you'd like to stop us and ask questions, we are happy to entertain any of those at any time that you'd like us to dig a little bit deeper. So with that stated, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is ESSER. We've been talking about these funds for probably the last 2 years, and it has been an ongoing stream of information that's come to us about it and ongoing learning that we've had to do to rapidly bring ourselves into an area where we understood what the intentions of the funds were and also what it would take to be compliant with these funds. I think that the most important piece for us to acknowledge on this first slide, there's actually two pieces. First is the second bullet, that these are one-time short-term funds. We believe that this is it. We don't believe that there's going to be any more relief funds that are coming that are either American Rescue Plan or ESSER related. So when we spend these, we need to be very strategic on them, and that the second most important bullet, that these are intended to support the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Penny's team really did a deep dive into identifying what the current needs are of our students, and then it was the business offices team to try to support the fiscal end of this to make sure that what their plan was affordable, sustainable, and actually achievable as well too. So when we approached planning for this phase of our implementation of spending ESSER funds, we really treated our remaining funds, the 3 pots of them, as one whole pot. We did not have to, by law, do that, but we felt it best that we took the entire pot, took a comprehensive needs assessment approach to it, and really planned for the entire approximately $10 million that was left. Again, if you all really wanted to be extremely bored this evening, I could go into very, very deep details about the strings and red tape that's taped around some of these dollars. Here's just a little flavor of it. 11T, the very last pot that you see that's about $2 million, this is the most restricted of the dollars. These dollars can only be utilized on students that are within identified subgroups, students with disabilities, students with economic challenges, et cetera. And 51.4% of it has to be used on learning loss, 10.3% on evidence-based after-school instruction, 10.3% on summer enrichment, et cetera, et cetera. And there's books and books and books and pages and pages and pages that go along with compliance. So again, from the business office perspective, we treated this as a whole, listened to the needs identified that Penny's going to talk about in just a minute, and tried to make the dollars fit to what those needs were. So again, our process was to plan approximately for all 10 million of these dollars in our last round, and to ensure that we are being compliant with the different components of each of these 3 pots of dollars.
All right, on to the fun part. So the first thing that we did, as Brian said, was consider our needs assessment. We anchored back to the needs assessment that we conducted as part of our continuous improvement process, and then we moved forward to consider the new needs that had emerged in relation to COVID and the impact that has had on students and staff. And you'll see this list in front of you really represents the essence of what we identified as needs, and through our collaborative planning sessions was affirmed as the needs that we should focus on. To lift out a few, of course, social emotional well-being and mental health of students and staff emerged as a theme. Certainly academic focus on math and English language arts in particular, given some of the lost learning opportunity we had during that period of COVID. We wanted to really think about equity and how we increase opportunity and access for all students, and building capacity was an important consideration. Some of these will be lifted out again. I will note the HVAC project at Northeast emerged as a need. It had been on our list for a while, and through our consultation and collaboration process, it remained as a priority for our stakeholders. From that, and I apologize, this slide might be a little bit hard to see, we really focused our consultation and collaboration sessions around these thematic priorities. The first being that we know that we needed to support the learning and growth and achievement of students, particularly those most directly impacted by COVID, and Brian listed some of those special populations of students that were identified in the legislation. Again, we knew that a priority needed to be well-being and mental health. I was really excited that most of our teams agreed that building capacity was important. So we can do what we need right now to sort of patch some of the holes that we have, but how can we really set ourselves up so this money pays it forward? How do we build our skills, our knowledge, and our systems, our capacity overall? And then, of course, how do we stay aligned back to our vision statement and our 2 continuous improvement goals? The first one being collaborative, safe, and equitable learning experiences for students and developing that culture. And the second goal is really about a comprehensive screening and assessment system that allows us to have a pulse on what every student is doing, how they're achieving, what their well-being is, so that they don't fall through the cracks. I really want you all to know and leave tonight with a clear understanding that I believe, I think Brian would too, exceeded our obligation for consultation. As Brian said, the legislation required us to collaborate with stakeholders, and I think we really went above and beyond. Starting in September, we convened internal groups of teachers and continuous improvement teams and administrators. We met with the MCA leadership team. We convened a group of community partners who had a particular stake or interest in meeting the needs of those identified students. We really made sure that we had a lot of dialogue and consultation. So that's represented on the people side of that. And on the process side, you can see that we were pretty thorough also through the needs assessment process, generating ideas. This was kind of a special opportunity for principals and school teams to put up on the board all the things that they've always wanted to support student learning. And then we really analyzed that to match it back to the specifications of ESSER and making sure that it aligned with our needs assessment. We did some really detailed planning, and that's where we lifted out the evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices are those that have shown through research either the promise to have a high impact on outcomes, or there is evidence in place to show that they are. And the legislation actually called for us to ensure that we were using evidence-based practices. And we started implementation, and these next series of slides, we're going to talk you through what those decisions were, and you'll hear where we are in the implementation phases. But I also want to assure you that we have a strong plan for monitoring along the way, providing support to the buildings, the schools where these pieces are implemented. We're going to course correct and adjust where our data tells us we need to, and continue to evaluate over time. All right, moving into elementary schools. So through this process, again, all the ideas emerged, and this is where we landed. These represent the high-level summary of what actually was submitted in our application to the Department of Education. At elementary schools, we are hiring social emotional learning facilitators. This is a staff member who is skilled both in coaching teachers to build their capacity and enhance their skills in supporting student needs, and also, if needed, can directly support students who need to be regulated and have that support in the moment. We are targeting ELA and math through specialized tutoring. We're really excited that we have several retirees who've come back to us to provide targeted intervention tutoring at many of our elementaries. And we are hiring a team of full-time paraprofessionals who have the skills to also provide academic interventions, and that's one per elementary school. We hired an additional student support specialist. You might remember that our student support specialists are funded through 31N, which is another pot of money we get specific to mental health. We exhausted that money and we'll continue to max that out, but there was a greater need, so we have hired additional student support specialists with our ESSER funds. And just today is the final day for proposals to be submitted for the RFP that we issued for after-school programming. As Brian said, there is a portion of money earmarked specifically for after-school programming, and we'll provide that specific to elementary schools. Moving on to middle schools, again, additional student support specialists. Those school teams recognize that there is more need than what our school counselors and other staff can handle, so brought some additional student support specialists online. We have a new ELA seminar course that will be started in the fall. This is to provide additional support to students who are not yet proficient and need that extra lift for English language arts. And students will actually double up, so they'll take their regular English language arts course and then enroll in the seminar course in addition to that. Same with the math seminar. So we've had a math lab seminar course on the books for middle school, and both of our middle schools utilize that, but the need has just increased, so we will be hiring additional staff to support that. At the middle schools, we also are hiring full-time staff to support the School Resource Center. This is a place where students who need a break from the full classroom setting can go for the day and be with a skilled, caring adult, kind of a reset spot where we can implement restorative practices. This is much preferred than sending them home for the day and out of the learning setting. So both at Jefferson and Northeast will have those additional staff. And learning coaches. We have one learning coach in our district who's been primarily assigned to Northeast with some time here at the district, and both middle schools requested a full-time learning coach. This is another one of those capacity building moves where it really supports teachers in implementing evidence-based practices at the classroom level. High schools. You'll see some similar themes here. So social emotional learning facilitator is something that both of our high schools identified as a clear need. Again, this is that person that is coaching teachers in how to infuse social emotional well-being at the classroom level, and also being an extra set of arms and a caring adult to support students who need that moment of regulation. We know that we had more students needing online learning support, so we are costing one of our electronic learning facilitators to ESSER funds. Learning coaches, similar to middle school. Each high school requested a learning coach, particularly focused on math and ELA most likely. And if we encounter some challenge here in hiring, then we requested contracted services. There are some agencies here in our region that we can contract with to provide coaching and professional learning support in those targeted areas. And finally, the addition of math seminar at our high schools. Actually, I'm really proud that we were able to launch this year, second semester. We're typically known to be a little bit slow in our process, and this was a moment where we really were responsive, and with the support of our Curriculum Instruction Assessment Committee, we're able to vet that and get it started. So we have students receiving that service and support right now in both of our high schools. This, again, is a situation where they double up on so they're enrolled in their regular math class and they're in this math seminar support class. Hey, Brian, you want to take the next one?
I certainly will.
Awesome.
If you recall back to the earlier portion of the year, you all heard a presentation from Steve Poole, Allison Cicinelli, and Jen Service about what was at that point the largest summer learning program that MPS had pulled off in recent memory. We have replicated that process and budget within these ESSER funds and plan on doing that for the next couple of years. So we've planned for those needs. And at the last Board of Education meeting, you all approved that HVAC project over at Northeast, which again, Penny has repeatedly said that it was elevated as a need to provide an equitable and good learning environment for the students that are over at Northeast. The process for this has been a little bit frustrating on our end in when we were informed about the funds and when we had applications become available to us. To no fault of the Michigan Department of Education, because they were dealing with deciphering regulations on their own. We were basically making guesses when we were building the budget for this fiscal year at what we were going to use the dollars on. We weren't able to access the actual ESSER 3, which was the middle and largest portion of the funds application, until the later part of the fall, and we were able to submit that right around Christmas time. So all of those months took time to plan, and so we really have not been able to put all of these into full effect until the midpoint of the year, when folks perceived that we were going to enter the year with all of those dollars fully available to us. So in reality, they have not become available until just about a month or so ago, including 11T, which the application for Midland Public Schools only became available about a week ago. So when we were planning trying to pace out when we were going to be able to access the funds, when we can draw down, which again complicated the jigsaw puzzle just a little bit. I thought I saw Kyle somewhere in the room. He's back there and he can wave. When this got done, I'll say that I kind of looked at Kyle and joked a bit with him and said, "You're never going to pull this off." It was great to see the wish list on the wall and everything that our comprehensive needs assessment said that we were going to wish to put in place at our schools. So we challenged Kyle. Megan's a part of our HR team as well too, and said, "Okay, here's the plan. Go get them." We're mighty proud of our HR team and what they've been able to do. For the 21-22 school year, since we have received approval of our ESSER 3 application, you could see our status and program implementation. That's actually out of date because just today I approved another retiree intervention program teacher. We have 17 current retirees actively tutoring our students, which is a phenomenal job recruiting by HR and by our building administrators. Our academic intervention paraprofessionals, all 4 that we intended to hire this year, are now hired or in place. The math intervention teacher that Penny noted, typically we don't move those that fast on things. Not only did we get the course designed, but we have the teacher up and running and in place already for semester 2. 2 of the 2 student support specialists have been hired. Social emotional learning specialists, we have 4 of 6 ready to go, and we believe, I think Kyle have another couple in the queue ready to start next year. So we will be 6 of 6 as of next year. And electronic learning facilitators, we've actually expanded that to 2, and we have 2 of those 2 filled. That slide, even though I went through it fast, is, again, I can't tell you in this hiring climate how proud we are of HR for being able to pull that off, for MPS to be able to get that talent here to be able to help kids now. So kudos to our HR team and kudos to all the people behind the scenes that had to help with posting, recruiting, and writing job descriptions, which in this day and age is also no easy task in and of itself. So Kyle's job is not over. If you go to the bottom part of that slide, he has more challenges for next year. For 22-23, our plans and pacing of hiring and in utilization of the funds calls for hiring 3 additional learning coaches, adding ELA math instructors. This is actually old. That says 2.5 FTE. As of a meeting that Penny and I had on Friday, that's now 4.6 FTE. Kyle will accept the challenge and get us a little bit over 4 ELA and math teachers and 2 additional academic intervention paraprofessionals. Based on our success rate thus far, I have a high degree of confidence that we will be able to fill those roles along with our summer school postings. And again, the Northeast HVAC project was already approved during the last board meeting.
All right, on to next steps. So as I said in the beginning, we are really committed to a thorough implementation and monitoring process. So we are going to make sure this is integrated up into our continuous improvement plans, our MyKIP plans, the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. We are going to continue supporting all of the folks who are implementing these strategies and activities. We have a monitoring plan in place where we'll meet monthly just to make sure that we're tracking on the intent of the funds and the intent of the positions. We'll collect data regularly and evaluate the progress, and as I said, course correct and make adjustments if needed. Similarly, in the fiscal monitoring part of this, we have monthly meetings with the business office, the implementation in the business office to make sure that we're on point and making adjustments as needed. And of course, we're committed to maintaining open communication. We know along this journey over the next couple of years, as Brian said, if we aren't able to hire all the staff, then we need to come back, look at our Plan B, make sure it aligns with the intent of the funds, our needs assessment, and implement those next Plan B steps. We hope we can stick with the original plan, but if not, we'll be sure and keep you all updated about the modifications that are made along the way. Any questions for us?
I had a question. Thanks for all the work you guys did on this. It seems outstanding. But my question is, how does the money that we got in ESSER funds compare to others across the state? I think it would be helpful for to remind us and share with our audience.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll preface it with the fact that if you remember last year, it was one of the craziest budget years that we ever had. We went into the year adopting a number that still makes me a little bit sick to my stomach when I have to remember presenting that number to you all. And at the end of the year, we finished in a very healthy position. And so we are thankful that we have the opportunity to get any dollars out of this because it could have gone the other way. But to honestly answer your question, in comparison to other districts, the amount of funds that we received are in proportion to the amount of poverty that exists within your district compared to the last census data. So there are districts that have thousands and thousands fewer students that got millions and millions more. It was aligned to the Title I distribution formula, and there were districts that have, just one, I'm not calling it by name, that has around 3,500 students, got almost $100 million total out of it. And so it really has been the Wild West in recruiting of talent because everyone's trying to do this right now. And the reason that all HVAC-related projects are so difficult to get and why we brought you that atypical get the units before is because every single district in the state is trying to upgrade their HVAC system right now because they have to have these dollars spent by 2024. So it's created this race to be able to procure. So we're happy to have the funds, but we do not have to the degree that other districts do. 11T, just to go into a little bit more detail on it, was the intention of the Michigan legislature to ensure that every district got a certain threshold of dollars. And so I had Penny look that up for me right before here, and I believe it was $1,093 per student. That extra $2 million that we have in 11T is because Midland Public in our ESSER 3 funds did not meet that minimum threshold of $1,093 per student. So that's how they brought Midland in a little bit more alignment with what they thought a minimum allocation could have been. So we're going to put these resources to good use. We're blessed to be able to have them, but there are other districts that will have a much longer presentation. If it were a $100 million presentation, you'd be listening for another 20 minutes. Yes, sir.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I know you're going to be monitoring this. You're going to be meeting monthly, so you're going to have 24 to 36 of these meetings. At that point in time, the money's over.
Yeah.
What do you see as the most sustainable part of our model at this point? Or is it too early to tell?
I'll start and Brian can correct if he thinks I'm off base. So as you can see, a lot of our money is spent hiring staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we found a nice balance of staff who are providing direct support to students in the immediate and staff who are working to build our capacity. So we hope that that has an impact that lasts. Just today, we talked about how over the years, hopefully the attrition will balance itself out and these folks can slide into other positions that become open. We also have additional supplemental funds. We have Title IIA, we have 31A, which is, as the state calls it, at-risk funds. And I think over time we can see an opportunity to, through the monitoring process and evaluating process, to see which of these strategies and activities really had a high impact, and we can prioritize those for some of those other funding sources. What would you add, Brian?
The only thing that I would add is we've thought, Brad, long and hard about that and are hoping that a certain component of the executive branch's budget proposal goes through. It's something that Superintendent Cheryl's been lobbying for a long time, which is to bring Midland Public into alignment with full 31A funding. As of right now, we're a 30% district, so for every dollar, we only get a third of that in Midland Public because we were an out-of-formula district due to our hold harmless millage, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the budget amendment presentation. The executive budget did have hold harmless districts brought whole, which could bring Midland Public, rough math, an additional $2.1 million per year in at-risk funding, which would be a game changer for MPS. And there's a lot of these strategies that could move into 31A. We're hopeful. We really wish and give good thoughts that that will go through as a part of the budget recommendation, but are definitely working on plans B, C, and D if and when that doesn't come to fruition. But if there's something that we can lobby for going through that component would be huge for Midland Public.
When you talk to legislators, the lobby, when we lobbied and got in, an at-risk kid is an at-risk kid, and therefore the funding should follow, and it's up to 35%. But now that they made us all equal on foundation allowance, they need to fix this because actually we're funded less than other base foundation districts since they don't make us whole here. That's your lobby to your legislators.
So to build on this line of discussion just a little bit, because these funds were distributed with the Title I formula, do we have to track how these funds are used for at-risk students as well?
Yeah, actually, the pieces, particularly 11T that Brian mentioned, we have to have some pretty tight accounting practices
Okay.
around the services provided to students who qualify. But in our typical Midland Public way, we're keeping good records on how we're using all of these funds. And particularly the ones that are most related to students will have lists of students and we'll know their criteria and how they've qualified for that.
Okay. And then one other, or I guess two other questions. So this is 100% MDE oversight, or do we have to go to any federal administration as well?
Well,
So-
it's
all
federal
state.
rule that is enforced by the Michigan Department of Education. It doesn't mean that we couldn't get magically picked
Right.
as one of, which we just seem to all the time. I don't know why. I think we have good restaurants in Midland, and that's why they always, it's only an hour and a half from Lansing, and they like to come this way, but it would most likely be monitored by the Michigan Department of Education. They are the ones that are creating the application platforms and approving the applications, and the ones that are consulting with us on those approvals.
Okay. And then my final question is, if we got our crystal ball perfect, these are funds that will be equally used over the 3 years? Or no?
No,
This is just-
that wouldn't be accurate. This year will be lighter than
Okay.
will be next year. It kind of is like a bell curve a little
Got it.
bit. Actually, that's probably not true. It's up and over.
Okay.
If you're looking at the curve, because we're going to phase in implementation, and our plans are for them to be exhausted by 2024
Okay.
in full. Again, as Penny said, if things don't go the way that we think they are and the crystal ball needs to change and turn around a little bit, that may change the pace of how we spend the funds as well too. But we really had to pace out, Phil, which funds we use when. ESSER 2B has to go first. 11T, because I can only use it on at-risk students. This is, again, heroes behind the scene. The business office deserves a lot of credit in figuring all this out. When we are portioning off a teacher, we're paying the teacher out of two funds. We're paying them out of ESSER 3, but we're also portioning off the at-risk students that they are serving and charging that to 11T, so it fits the use of those funds for using for students with identified subgroups. So every teacher has its own specific line of paperwork that we have to do to be in compliance with it. It really has been a team approach to pulling this all off, and we joked the other day that it's 25% of our jobs right now is to meet, consult, plan. It's great because it's great for kids, great problem to have, but it's been an interesting adventure.
Well, thank you.
Great questions. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for all the work put into this by everybody on all fronts. We appreciate it. Okay, we are going to move on. Next up is item 3.3. This is the highly anticipated results of the equity audit, and we have Mr. DeAndre Hogan here to present. Mr. Mr. Hogan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Before I get into the presentation, the equity consultants that we work with throughout this 8-9 month span, it was all done virtually. We're in the middle of mandates and lockdowns, so all the work, everything that you'll see this evening was done virtually, and wanted to give you a chance to see and hear from our partners in this effort. So Megan, you can roll that.
Good evening, Superintendent Sharrow, President McFarland, members of the school board, the Midland Public Schools staff, the students, and the greater Midland community. My name is Britt Britton, and this is my colleague, Jessica Wilson.
I represent a team that has collaborated across the last 10 months to deeply analyze and interpret MPS's data to elevate the most strategic recommendations to not only inform but drive the district's short and long-term approach to realizing the diversity, equity, and inclusion vision. Lead with respect, trust, and courage. Ensure an equitable, collaborative, and inclusive culture. Enable all to achieve success.
We would like to thank the district for partnering with us in this very important work, and especially thank you, Assistant Superintendent Miller-Nelson and Director Hogan, for your contributions over the collaboration of this project. We would also like to thank the dozens of members of the Midland community for sharing their time, their insights, and their experiences with us. Those personal connections are invaluable to our work and our why as an organization, and we appreciate the warmth with which we were welcomed by everyone with whom we came in contact with throughout this process. Insight is an international education consulting company founded in 2000. We are honored to partner with education leaders from across the country that represent all types of schools and districts to increase equity and achievement for all students. Whether it's large-scale change or systems refinement, we are most proud of meeting with each partner and meeting them where they are, working alongside them to stretch them to the next level. Our ability to provide such services is driven by our deep understanding of the principles of change, as well as the ability to craft thoughtful, strategic plans that guide sustainable implementation.
Every day, with every partnership and in our internal work, we strive to embody our core values. Equity is the driving force behind every decision we make. We are independently strong workers, but collaborate intentionally. We are former teachers, administrators, and district leaders who value continual reflection and personal refinement, as well as our own development. We are flexible and adapt to meet the ever-changing needs of our partners. And simply said, we love what we do, who we do it with, and we have fun in the process.
Our audit is grounded in 5 key domains: structures, systems, and resources, culture and community, racial equity in the educator workforce, professional learning and personal growth, and curriculum, instruction, and learning. Throughout the audit process, we focus on how the 5 domains are realized within the district's beliefs, their practices, and their policies in order to provide equitable opportunity and access that result in the achievement of outcomes for all learners.
Our audit team conducts a deep dive into the district's qualitative and quantitative data, as well as the community context shared with us from a variety of perspectives, including district partners, families and caregivers, students, leaders, and teachers. The equity audit process consists of 4 main phases: the document and process review, the qualitative and quantitative data review, the stakeholder engagement, and the finalization of the report.
We began last summer when we looked at a variety of documents that were provided by the district and also available publicly. At that time, we also analyzed the quantitative data to examine the different outcomes for the district. In the fall, we administered a perceptual survey to a wide variety of stakeholder groups that were also identified by the district. We received 4,253 total respondents from the surveys. In addition, we conducted 12 focus groups with a total of approximately 50 participants, as well as 11 individual interviews, again representing a wide range of stakeholders. And finally, this past winter, we conducted in-depth strategic analysis of all the quantitative and qualitative data in order to identify and elevate key findings, and then crafted high leverage recommendations. This work culminated in the final report that has been presented to the school district. What you find reflected throughout the report is that the intentional equity work that MPS has committed to and engaged in over the last few years has laid a very strong foundation, and you are well positioned to anchor your comprehensive planning in your beliefs about and goals for equitable learning environments for all students.
Some examples from the equity report of ways to engage in that work. We found that stakeholders across the district knew that the district has a clear vision for equity, but what they are less sure of is how the district defines equity and how they will monitor their progress towards achieving it. Another example is that we found there are numerous professional learning opportunities available to staff throughout the district, but they are often offered in pockets at the discretion of leaders, and there is little consistent effort to scale up successful initiatives district-wide. A final example would be the Midland DEI strategy, which identifies 5 key focus areas that align to the priorities elevated in our audit. What is needed now is the strategic collaboration to define measurable goals, actionable next steps, and clear systems and processes to make sure that Midland successfully operationalizes and institutionalizes that strategy. We want to thank you again for partnering with us as you engage challenging yet rewarding work of taking equity in Midland Public Schools to the next level.
After having spent the past more than 10 months with members of the Midland Public Schools community, as well as the leadership there, we feel honored to have gotten to know the community better and to have experienced the MPS pride ourselves. Thank you for allowing us to serve the Midland community and to play a part in inspiring excellence through the completion of the equity audit. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us with any questions and let us know if there's any other ways that we can support you in this important work. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Megan. And I hope that just provided a little context into Insight Education Group, the folks that we work with, as they said, over more than 10 months of effort that went into this, and I'm glad that we were all able to hear from them themselves. And getting into it, so...
Hey, DeAndre, can I interrupt? One little thing is that this and the actual audit will be posted to the webpage, correct?
Yep, that's right. So after,
you guys don't have to frantically take notes. You can keep taking notes, but you can also sit back and listen if you would like.
Yep. Yeah, so after this evening's presentation will be made available by tomorrow at the latest. So, all right. It's real touchy. Yeah. All right, so throughout the full report that you'll have access to afterwards, this is just a breakdown of the contents within it. We'll go over the equity framework, the equity audit process, recommendations and findings, as well as closing and next steps. And I'll flash this up again as we referred to in the video introduction. This is the equity framework, and this is the overall framework. And tonight, as I go through the slide deck, the presentation, it will be organized in alignment with these 5 domains. So what you will find or hear from me are strengths and needs identified throughout the survey and focus groups and out the audit process, followed up by recommendations from Insight. I'd like to start with our overall assets. So these are all positives, things that were identified throughout the data collection process. That, some items that we are doing well, but, can definitely continue to build on. One mainly is our commitment to equity. Even prior to my joining the district, This work didn't start when I stepped foot here. A couple years prior, even before that, we kind of engaged in equity work and trying to identify what we were missing and the gaps that were there. And this came out throughout the data collection process. So our commitment to equity. Another highlight is that families feel comfortable engaging with school staff in conversations. And staff feel that there are professional learning opportunities to deepen learning. And as far as family and students, they overall, or folks that responded to the survey and focus groups, believe that there's rigorous academic programs, including PYP and our IB diploma program at the high schools. And I want to touch back on the surveys that went out. Britt shared that over 4,000 individuals responded to the surveys in total, and that was students, faculty and staff, and parent groups as a whole is who responded. And there were 12 focus groups, and 50 total participants participated in those. And we were shooting between 8 to 10 folks at each focus group. But schedules and things and all the things that goes on in life kind of kept our numbers a little lower. But we did try our best to get engagement out of all our stakeholders in the district. Okay. And moving on, so the first domain we're going to go through is the structure, systems, and resources. In here, so strengths identified, where the district, we have a stated vision of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was highlighted that the Board of Education's board proclamation that was adopted summer 2020, which was a resolution to change the system, eliminate racism, and create more equitable and inclusive schools for all. And across the district, there's consensus that there is a definition of equity. And Jess touched on that a little bit in one of her examples. And as we get down to the needs, when I'll bring out, if you're looking at the third bullet at the top, yes, there's overall consensus that there is a equity definition within the district. But when, say in focus groups, folks were asked to elaborate, we're not easily able to come up with what that definition is. So that's a need that we have to continue to build on and develop as we go through this work, a solidified definition of equity and what that means for the district. As well as I put here a more current and comprehensive strategic plan, but essentially that's building up on the strategy that was already put in place, again, prior to my joining, but now it's kind of encouraging us to get to the next step to build upon it and start creating some action plans moving ahead. And recommendations here, one is to develop a robust data collection, analysis, implementation protocols. Next, as I touched on, develop uniform expectations, practices, and system-wide that ensure equitable opportunities, access, and outcomes for all students. Third is to develop a district equity team that will work in collaboration with district leadership and work in an advising capacity to help out with planning. And then to complement that, a recommendation is to set up a school-based equity team to, again, act as a subset to the district equity team and to continue to making sure there's the approach is taken up across the district. Next domain is culture and community. Things that are looked at here are anti-racist culture and climate, socio-emotional supports for well-being and safety, and community engagement and social trust. And again, Penny and Brian's presentation, I feel like a lot of this stuff aligns into the effort that we're putting in as a district. So SEL, well-being, safety, all these kind of go hand in hand if you think about it as we get into it. Strengths here is that family and caregivers are very comfortable interacting with staff and like administrators and staff in their schools and when it comes to having conversations about their students, and that the district provides training for, or the district has provided or began steps to restorative practices, and working on implementing those throughout our student code of conduct and throughout our schools. Needs here is to implement a system of positive behavior supports to complement restorative practices. There's multiple stages and phases into restorative practices, and so our need is to complement that with other supports or next phases. And another need in this domain is that 30% of parents do not feel that they have been invited to actively be involved in planning initiatives, supporting programs, and providing input to the school. Recommendations here are to develop a system-wide restorative process to implement and enforce disciplinary matters, and as a public school, be accountable and transparent. Make those our priority. Second is to enlist the entire school community to work toward establishing a supportive community focus on equitable outcomes and inclusivity among all members. And lastly, in this domain, is to build upon already established communication processes. So it's great that our parents feel comfortable talking with us, but now we're encouraged to build up on those relationships already established and set up a system of where stakeholders can feel that it's not always one way, that they feel heard and responded to. Next is racial equity in the educator workforce. All right, and I want to say this. I know Brian built Kyle up pretty good in this last presentation. This is not a knock on our HR team at all. And hearing everything that Brian makes Kyle do, I look at this as ways that we can help support Kyle and the HR team into fulfilling our vision statement and responding to these recommendations. Throughout the data collection process, there was no evidence of an established district-wide recruitment or retention strategy. But in lieu of that, and again, I think from the last presentation, I think our HR staff has been scrambling, kind of just building the tracks as they go, and so they've just been responding to the need at this point, which is very understandable. And in light of that, they are working to expand the talent pool search. For example, working with Saginaw Valley State to trying to pull folks from their accelerated programs to enter to our classroom and to our talent search. And the third point here, school-based staff did not feel that we do a good job effectively recruiting and retaining staff of color. And recommendations here is to develop a talent management strategy led by a senior staff member that's familiar with talent management strategies that it can put the man hours or can afford to put the man hours to recruitment and retention efforts, and help us develop talent pipelines from other universities and other areas. Next is to create conditions for district leaders to continue to engage in deep reflection, checking our own biases, checking if the things that we show up with is that kind of preventing us from looking at diverse candidates and whatnot, and kind of develop plans to address and mitigate that if it does exist. Next is professional learning and professional growth. Here, what was examined was professional development, educator engagement, and alignment and integration. Overall, staff agree that there are opportunities to deepen understanding of equity, and that it was indicated throughout focus groups and surveys that there's a wide variety of training, and highlighted there under the second bullet, items like the DEI forums, racial equity challenge, school-based book clubs, and mandatory equity training. Needs are to shift these efforts or shift these this equity training into more action and implementation. A lot of the work so far has been, again, what I touched on a little bit ago, kind of trying to check our biases and what are we bringing into the classroom, how are we showing up, our mental well-being, our mindsets heading into the classrooms. What this indicates to me is that our teachers are ready for the next step into what does this look like in my classroom. Give me examples, give me some practice into doing this well. As well as it was indicated that the rollout of some of these DEI trainings is inconsistent across the district. We believe these things are happening in pockets, but what we would like to get it system-wide approach going. Recommendations here is to develop and implement a plan for district-wide consistent professional learning that focus on cultural competence at all levels of staff, including district office and staff members. And second is to elevate the leadership of Director of DEI. I promise I didn't put this in here myself. So elevate the leadership of Director of DEI. Continue to look and search for opportunities to grow my learning and to grow myself in this area so I can come back and share resources with our staff. All right, and the fifth domain, curriculum, instruction and learning. Here we look at, or what was assessed was racially competent curriculum, instructional delivery, and programmatic access to equity. Strengths here indicate, again, as students, family, and caregivers, they believe that academic needs are being met throughout. There's a high level of agreement of that occurring. Second, there is evidence that classroom libraries, I think our library pairs do a great job of incorporating more inclusive texts or texts that offer different perspectives or different stories that a student may not be exposed to otherwise. And third is that 90% of our students feel that they have the same opportunities to participate in any course. Needs here that was indicated by our staff was consistent support facilitating instruction using new texts and materials. Second is that a third of our students indicated that that is very class and teacher specific, whether they engage or have opportunities to talk about diverse identities or different topics within their classrooms. And lastly, as a third bullet, in the strengths indicate that 90% of students believe they have the opportunity to participate in all courses. When it came to the focus group, when we kind of drilled down a little more with the folks that participated, they did express concerns with the district's use of tracking. And recommendations here is to continue to expand our current curriculum and instructional materials to have content that prioritizes inclusion and equity, and to continue to expand our use of the 5D teacher instructional growth and evaluation rubric. We are currently that is currently in use here, but the 5D, they are also doing some internal work with ensuring that inclusion and equity is a part of the evaluation process, so we'll be utilizing that as well. And second is to establish a district-wide culture developmental responsiveness that can respond for adults to be able to respond to students' individual, cultural, and developmental learning needs and strengths. And any questions so far?
Can you explain maybe a little more what you mean by the district's use of tracking?
Yep, so that got into our point system that we use. I know we have point 2, 3, and 4 in our classrooms and for different classes. And during the focus group, students indicated the extra stress and pressure put on them to maintain high academic achievement while being in the highest or most rigorous courses, and also spoke to if you start out in the tier 2 or track or point 2 class, it's very difficult to advance to a point 3 and later point 4, as what was indicated throughout that portion. Yep. So. All right, moving on, I would like to highlight some of the work done so far. And I even think during the prior presentation, we kind of, again, the language, SEL, well-being, inclusion, and equity are, kind of just becoming part of our language. And so throughout this equity audit process, we weren't just kind of twiddling our thumbs, waiting on these results. We were kind of getting to work, hoping that this equity audit will provide us kind of the roadmap or the next steps into how to advance this work. And so far, different learning opportunities surrounding DEI comes in forms of district provided staff development, different equity challenges. Last spring, we introduced the racial equity challenge, a 10-week experience. This spring, doing something similar with Women's History Month challenge. Just getting those resources, getting that content to our teachers to give them better understanding and context. Continued learning through Canvas, as the two items I mentioned ran through Canvas. Inclusive text training, we have different partnerships with different organizations. We're providing training for our teachers to how to pick and how to decipher and how to navigate a discussion around a diverse topic. Implementing culture and climate leaders within each of our schools to, again, help with the communication barrier. I see them as acting as conduits between the building and here, the district admin, and helping to, again, promote and keep DEI a constant front of mind item. And right now, we're currently identifying a equity framework to anchor to help create our own assessments and to hold ourselves accountable to, again, living out our vision and meeting the recommendations given to us by the consultants. As well as community involvement, there's a parent EI advisory team engaged in several projects. Again, now we're going to formulate how does that tie in to the recommendations, and again, to help the district and key personnel advance in the area of DE&I. The next steps, we're going to continue to share the equity audit results with stakeholder groups, creating spaces for dialogue. Also integrating into the MyKit process, our continuous improvement process, weaving the work into the fabric of the district processes, and expanding current DEI strategic plan into a 5-year strategy. Again, because this stuff is not, these recommendations aren't going to be met in the matter of a summer. We're going to build out a cadence to do this stuff intentionally and put some structure behind it. And equity framework. Again, going to identify equity framework to anchor our equity work to, and frameworks in mind, as I said, will help us come up with metrics and goals for our progress. Any questions so far before I get into?
Can you expand a little bit on the focus groups, DeAndre, or the stakeholder groups?
Different stakeholder groups?
Yeah.
Yep, so we have some internal stakeholder groups like teacher leaders, culture and climate leaders that we will give this same presentation to and discuss next steps with them. Some community partners are interested as well, so we're going to make sure we keep them up to date and explore ways that can support the district in this effort. So, all right, and I would like to thank Dow leadership for their support in this effort. They helped us with funding for this process. Thanks to you all, your leadership, Board of Education, for allowing us to partake in this effort. I'd like to thank our MPS district team as well. Mike, all the associate superintendents. This was a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting, and I wasn't doing it myself. So I appreciate you all. And thanks to all those who did take time to fill out surveys, respond to emails, and requests for focus groups participation. Your input is extremely valid. And again, it's helping us shape our next steps into living out our district vision. So that's it.
DeAndre, thank you for an excellent presentation.
So DeAndre, the previous presentation of ESSER, we're getting certain dollars
we have to follow a whole bunch of criteria and check all these boxes and make sure that we are achieving our goal. It's very quantifiable. I know we have frameworks, goals, metrics. How are we going to measure our progress in those challenges that we have? And then how does that get reported back to the public or the board? Is that going to be on a monthly basis that we are going to boil down this into goals and metrics that we're going to try to achieve, and then we're going to keep working on those and keep reporting back? Is that going to be the process?
Yeah, that can definitely be part of the process or the cadence. I think the first step is, again, as we're doing right now, working to identify an equity framework to help us create metrics, help us create some goals, and again, kind of build out that calendar of what items, some low hanging fruit that we can take care of right away. Do that, and again, build out, take the next steps and go forth. And different
Andre
equity.
may gave you the 20-minute version, but
Yeah.
deeper in the plan, to help him out a little bit, it does say that we must develop those, Brad.
Okay.
So that's one of our criticisms, was develop the next level, and so I was gonna pull DeAndre off the hoof a little bit here, because I think it's a
I
little
was waiting
bit
for him to take a
Penny's
breath.
area as well. But basically, deeper in there, when you see the full report, he'd been here all night doing the full report, it's 40 pages. It talks about us needing to develop that next level, and I think that's fair. 'Cause
Yes,
we
I
knew
think
that, we
each one
didn't
of
have
those
that.
recommendations will have action steps around it that we'll make sure are measurable. You might have noticed one of the recommendations was that we have data, we just aren't disaggregating it and using it in the best fashion. So let's just take an example, access to higher level courses for students who have been marginalized. It would be easy for us to start really digging into our data and tracking over time that we're creating more access for all students to enroll in IB and AP courses. I mean, that's one small example of this bigger picture. So some of it is really hard data, and I think we can't deny that some of it is how our students feel. And so we are just going to need to continue to keep a pulse on the student experience and the staff experience with some of this as well. But yes, I anticipate we'll come back on the regular, both through the committee structure as well as to the board, and share our progress over time. We expect to be held accountable for the
I would
measures around
imagine we'd
this.
bring a system with some metrics.
Yes.
The data's there. Penny's absolutely right. It's all in there. We just haven't ever used it in that manner.
Okay. Then also, you also said the challenge to Kyle, and just a comment that we sat in on a different meeting earlier today, John and myself and Lynn, that there was a particular category of a teacher that Midland Public Schools has a need for. And it was shared with us that there was one graduate in the state of Michigan that had that classification of something that we needed. I can't tell you whether or not that person is going to be joining us, but we've talked to that person. But there are some challenges. There are definite challenges out there for hiring, and we don't have the numbers coming out of our teaching schools that we've had in the past. So that's going to be a lot of recruiting and a lot of things rooms we haven't been in before.
So the real discussion is how do we make that pool larger? And so it's really partnering with our universities on College of Education to not only make teaching more attractive and begin to fill the pipeline again, but also those with diverse backgrounds. And so, and I'll have to tell you, I just Friday spent half a day at Saginaw Valley. They're probably one of the leaders in this out there. And so, as we, from the alternative certification program they're doing and some of the other pieces that they're doing in that. And so, there's a lot of work here. I think Michigan Department of Ed, our state superintendent has laid out 4 or 5 strategic plans on how to increased College of Education enrollment, because I think you're right, Brad. It's empty anyway, and it's really empty of people of color for sure. So it's going to be a tough road to hoe. Kyle's signed us up for several, what's the acronym?
HBCUs.
HBCUs, but I wasn't want. We had a discussion on acronyms earlier today, so I wanted the actual terminology.
Yep.
We kill everybody with acronyms.
Yeah.
But, how many, DeAndre?
What's that?
HBCUs.
Yep, HBCUs.
Stands for.
Historically Black colleges and universities.
And so we had signed ourselves up for several of those, and because of the virtual world, they haven't adjusted yet, the universities, it was virtual, and it were not exactly attractive to somebody who decided to come talk to Midland Public Schools. So we were uninvited to one of the jobs because we had no one sign up for us. And so we can't wait to get there, so maybe we can be actually a little more aggressive in the arena floor where those are going on as well, so.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Okay, that moves us on to item 4. This is request to address the board. And starting us off is Katie Roble. Good evening, Katie. Thank you for joining us.
So as I was sitting there, I kind of debated, like, just trusting that the board and the administrative staff would know how the efforts to create a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable district are appreciated and thoroughly supported by parents in the district. I'm one of them. But like that silence can leave room for uncertainty, and as a parent, I want for my kids to see that stepping into a space to speak to values of equity and inclusion and express genuine gratitude is always going to be the right decision. So I'm really hoping that the MPS staff and board and administrative personnel continue helping our children learn how to advocate for themselves and others, and speak kindly and clearly such that future generations have the skills, knowledge, and abilities to build the environments where all can thrive. I'm just genuinely here to really thank all of you for the work that you're doing, and continue encouraging you to help and support our children learn how to create the inclusive environments that we all seek to have. So thank you. The work that you're doing is amazing. It's not easy work. It is emotionally and psychologically draining and exhausting, and you have lots of people constantly yelling at you. But know that those of us out there really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Roble.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Joe Bonadies. Good evening, welcome back.
Hello. My name's Joe Bonadies, and I'd like to follow up on the issue of subcommittee minutes from the previous meeting. Historically, when a subcommittee did not meet, they just skipped it on the agenda entirely. At the January 10th meeting, there were 3 committees that did not have any minutes on the agenda, not read, therefore not approved, but there was a total of 6 action items. At the January 19th meeting, we had some fireworks about the minutes and some fallout. At the February 28th meeting, I spoke about the confusion, and Phil Roush, thank you, was able to finally state that there were no subcommittee minutes to report on the January 10th meeting. First, there were 3 chairpeople at those various subcommittees present, and no clarification was offered in real time when the ruckus started on January 19th. Second, there were no meetings to report. That being the case, where did the action items Mr. Sharrow put on the agenda come from? I'll give you the human resources one, somebody died, somebody retired, not a problem. I'll even give you the curriculum group because it was follow-up from items from a previous agenda, and it just rolled, no problem. But finance, facilities, and operations had 5 action items, 4 involving capital expenditures totaling $293,398. Were these leftovers from a previous meeting? Were these from an even less transparent meeting that took place? Or has this group delegated so much authority to the superintendent that he can just wing it? Doing research, on October 28th, 2013, the board updated policy 1210, which describes the board and superintendent relationship. In the policy, the board abdicated its responsibility to direct anything at the school district level, driving all authority to the superintendent. Quote, policy should not be originated or changed without the recommendation of the superintendent, unquote. I would propose that the board did not have the authority to delegate the implementation of medical devices to kids, i.e. masks, nor do they have the right to practice medicine and recommend an experimental vaccine for kids. Given the new studies after the heat of the COVID battles showing a lack of evidence for masks, I would state that right here that when the next strain comes around, you should not steal another semester from these already abused kids. And before you take money from the government to address the mental health of the kids, please read the strings attached to the money. You might not want to be responsible for them later. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the board made no recommendation in any way, shape, or form regarding vaccine. Moving on, Don Diebert. Good evening, Mr. Diebert. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Hi, President and members of the Board of Directors of the Midland Public Schools. I'd like to have a chance to talk to you for a moment. My name is Don Diebert. I have lived in Midland since 1980. My wife and I have no children, but we have a great interest in Midland Public Schools. We've followed it for many years, and we think it's a great system, and we want it to continue being that such going into the future. I had a different comment because I wasn't sure the report, what the status was going to be, but I think it was a very well done presentation. But to be fair, it was general. I think you'd all agree with that. And as you get down into the specifics, I think it's very important that we maintain public input, parental input, all the way along, including each of the steps. I notice that you have a parental DEI committee team. I think it's very important that that team have broad representation, people who might like these ideas, people who may not like these ideas, a broad range. I also think that the public itself should have access to those members so they can provide input to them. And even with that, it's still, no matter what you do, is going to be a small group. And I think it's important that you have other public input sessions as you get more into the details. So much of this was policy, implementing policy. I don't think there's going to be major issues on implementing policy. When you get down to some of the specifics, some of the curriculum issues, I really do sense that this school board is interested in making sure each kid has the ability to develop to the best of his ability so that you're not going to be dropping programs because some students aren't really able to handle it. You're going to keep the same kind of priorities you have right now, and all that's good. And I am very much in favor of each student. The racial issue, everyone agrees we need to do more on that. But I think the key issues are parental involvement. This particular team, you need to have a broad group. They should be people who don't necessarily agree with each other. That's the way you get the best input. They should have access to the public at large so that they can give them input back and forth. And I still think even with that, you still need some more overall public input as you go forward on the different steps. Thank you very much.
Next we have, is it John Truitt? Good evening, Mr. Truitt. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me.
So I am a parent, I'm a historian, I'm an educator. Like many of us here, we're really concerned about our kids, their future, our neighbors' kids, and I'm here because I want to talk about the DEI. And I think while you're going to have lots of people coming to you where we disagree on different things, so I'm a big proponent of the humanities, I think they need to be pushed more in the school district. I don't want to get into that. We're going to have arguments about that, but I think we can all agree that we want our kids to be prepared to go into successful jobs wherever it's going, or to go on to higher education. I think everybody in this room agrees that's a space where we need to go. And the comments last week, or not last week, but at the last meeting about the Alphabet Safe Space Club at Jefferson Middle really upset me. In part, it's beyond just being supportive of those students that's important, but if we're preparing our students, we need to prepare all of our students. The Alphabet Safe Space Club is about gender and sexual alliance that works to promote more inclusive and accepting learning environments for all students, reduce harassment or teasing, especially related to a person's real or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, I want to provide that in comparison to the largest employer in the area, Dow, and their GLAD ERG, right? This is their employee resource group. In 2020, GLAD, Dow's LGBTQ+ and ally ERG, celebrated its 20th anniversary. Over the years, GLAD has been instrumental in helping to ensure that Dow is an inclusive workplace for LGBTQ+ employees. And it goes on. My point here is that this group at the middle school is mirroring what our large corporations and our two largest employers in the area are doing, Central Michigan University and Dow Chemical. These groups are there to support people who identify in that way. Our schools should be there and should support them. I commend the work that the teacher and the students and the staff are doing in that space. But I also commend you in trying to make the space open for people who don't necessarily agree to understand why these groups are important. Our students, even if you disagree with those groups, they're going out into companies and they're going out into businesses that have them. They need to know how to work in those spaces. Central Michigan University has two groups specifically to that part, Spectrum and Transcend, right? If we're going to have concerns about this, thank you for your presentation. You did an awesome job. Let's go talk to our community leaders who are in this space. Talk to Karen Carter, talk to Stan Shingles. Bring them in, ask their input. Give them more than 3 minutes. They're experts in the area. Let's get their opinions. Thank you. Thank you.
Heidi, am I saying this right, Nizaki? Did it screw that up?
Nizaki, that's pretty good.
I'm sorry, Heidi. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Heidi Nizaki. I'm a psychologist, but most importantly, I am the mother of two children, a 4th grader and a 7th grader who goes to Jefferson Middle School. And I'd like to say it is tough being a parent. The world is not the same as it was when we were all kids. I know, like math, I have said to my children so many times, I can tell you how to get to the answer, but I can tell you what the answer is, but I can't tell you how to get there because they changed math on us. So we parents try to keep up so we can help our children. Many of us took classes before our first child was even born, and there we learned about birthing and babies and how an ultrasound could tell us the sex of our child. But the classes didn't cover how other developmental processes, such as hormone exposure and brain development before and after birth, form gender, and that awareness of one's own gender happens around the age of 3. We also didn't learn about how sexual orientation awareness can begin around age 7, and typically is known to one's own self around 7th or 8th grade. We aren't warned that our offhand comments implying choice in these identities creates shame. We aren't told that if we make rejecting comments and rules, such as not allowing our gay or non-binary children to socialize with gay friends or to join a gay-straight alliance, like the Jefferson Alphabet Safe Space Club, that these children who we are trying to protect actually become 3.4 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 5.9 times more likely to struggle with severe depression, and 8.4 times more likely to commit suicide or attempt to. School is another major place our children are learning about their perceived worth to the world. LGBT students who do not have a supportive relationship with an adult at school are 3 to 6.5 times more likely to report substance use, depressive symptoms, and suicidal ideation. LGBTQ youth who attend affirming schools are about half as likely to attempt suicide as the youth who attend non-affirming schools. So, I would like to thank you for providing a safe space to all of our youth. Thank you to the teachers who hang pride flags in their classroom and respectfully ask each student's pronouns. Thank you to the board, to the administrators, and the staff who support the student-led organization where youth practice leadership skills while learning how to be accepting and courageously kind to one another. And thank you for listening to us parents who all love our children very much while we struggle with new math and sometimes new pronouns.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer Vinnette. Good evening, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thanks.
The floor is yours.
I want to let my students speak for themselves about what it meant to them to study history with an emphasis on DEI, asking whose stories do we tell and why. So these are my Grand Valley students' own reflections. My biggest takeaway from History 103 was learning that history is not something we can hide from. History can be dark and it can make us uncomfortable, but it can also teach us so much. I learned it's important to accept history for what it is. We cannot change the past, but we can most definitely use it to be aware of our present and to better our future. Sitting in this classroom, there were definitely times when topics discussed made me feel upset or uncomfortable, but then I considered why those things made me feel that way, and I realized all I can do is continue to learn with an open mind and do better for my future. Another student said, my biggest takeaway from this class has been that there is so much more to history than what was incorrectly taught or completely erased from K-12. This course was truly eye-opening to me as I've learned how much I don't even know about my own past. As someone who is LGBT+, this has been the first class to ever discuss LGBT+ history. It was refreshing, but in some sense also heartbreaking to learn some of the history surrounding the community. This class has made me want to learn more and to question what I've been taught before. Another student wrote, I think my biggest takeaway from this class is that people are messy and have always been and always will be. I have always been terrified for our future because of things like COVID and our politics, but you in this class helped me realize that this stuff, or at least similar, has been happening throughout our histories and our ancestors made it through, so maybe we can too. Our world has a lot of good and beauty in it, but it's also a bleep show. Sorry, they're college students. My biggest takeaway from History 103 is that it's important to talk about uncomfortable topics. We discussed many things like women's rights, slavery, LGBTQ, policing, vaccinations, etc. Many of these topics have ugly past and people weren't treated well. However, if we're not willing to talk about these subjects, nothing will ever change and we won't know how to become better. What we do now will impact our future. If we want to put the work in now, we will hopefully see good results. If we choose to ignore the hard stuff because that's easier to do, it will really hurt us in the end. Thank you for being so honest with us and not being afraid to talk about the uncomfortable past. I will be forever grateful, and I will take these aspects into my future career. They felt equipped. So thank you for this work, and please continue.
Thank you. Kelly Bax. Hi, Kelly.
Hi,
Good evening. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly Bax. I've listened to some of what's been said here tonight, and when I hear about COVID, to me, was it a pandemic or a plandemic? You guys are putting out till 2024, and you're talking HVAC. We're all sitting here today. We're not social distancing. You're not wearing masks. So why was the HVAC not fixed during a time where COVID was such a real concern? It seems to me like now you're getting the money and you're trying to justify the money to make it fit the means. That's depressing. As a taxpayer, I would rather see you guys getting money to make the curriculum for the children better, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Not talking about a sickness. This is gonna go away. Now you guys are trying to figure out how to spend the money between now and 2024. Like, it's gonna come back. Well, is it gonna come back when you guys run out of money? Is that how we decide when a pandemic is gonna hit again? As we run out of money, we need money for our schools and our hospitals? It shouldn't work that way. When I hear the word stakeholder, it has multiple meanings. You asked him specifically stakeholders. What I didn't hear was children and parents. and the taxpayers that pay the property taxes for the schools. Those are the true stakeholders here. When I hear diversity and inclusion, when you go to get your car fixed, do you want, or go into the dealership and you say, I want my car fixed, but it best be somebody that's black or gay? No, you want somebody that's trained to work on your vehicle. You want the best fit person for the job. So if you can't find teachers that fit a need, maybe the need's not real. Maybe you're creating a need and you're trying to fill it. Find the best person with the best teaching qualities that have the best interest of the child, not because of their color, not because of their race, their religion. The education is what is required. Do you want a history teacher teaching math? No. You're going to go find a math teacher that fits that criteria. When you talk about children at 3 years old discussing their sex, I raised 3 children of my own. I drove a school bus. Kids don't think about those things. An adult at Dow Chemical in the GLAD is not the same as a 3-year-old on a playground. They don't even know what they want for lunch. So please don't try to describe a 3-year-old as the same as an adult. Sex and children should never mix, period. When you talk about having a special space for somebody and you're calling them a special needs, you have now just labeled a child. That child should never have a label. They should all be treated the same. As you took an oath on that flag right there, indivisible, under God, with liberty and justice for all. When you start separating people by races and genders, you become the division source. You're not bringing them together. You're creating a void, and you're trying to justify it with money. Money should never be your driving force. It should be the education of all children. Thank you.
Thank you. Renita Bonadis. Good evening and welcome back.
Good evening. This board, with the help of our local publications, has done all it can to keep the general public from knowing what has been going on in the ways you are not open and transparent. You've cut our time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, even when there are very few speakers, which was your original justification for cutting our time back to 3 minutes from 5. But I guess now that the new bylaw is in place, you won't give that time back. It continues the trend of less and less transparency and open communication with the community. When I began attending the meetings back in July last year, I noticed frequent references at meetings to not following the bylaws. I didn't understand why the bylaws weren't being followed, at least not all of them. We were held to restrictions in the bylaws, but the board wasn't. So I asked some legal experts and found my answer. As I'm sure you know, having your own resident lawyer on the board, there's nothing that can be done legally if you don't follow your bylaws. They are there to govern your business, but don't have to be followed legally. I guess this all makes sense, why parents and community members referenced bylaws and you just sit there and ignore all of us. It is important to let the community know a few things. You take an oath that says that you will faithfully discharge the duties of the office. Apparently, the duties of the office in your book are not to follow all the bylaws and policies in the MPS district. You leverage them against the public, but don't adhere to them yourselves. Also, the public agenda comment item's last paragraph is somewhat threatening. That was added in November. Speakers are asked to express themselves in a civil manner with due respect for the dignity and privacy of others who may be affected by the comments. While it is not the district's intent to stifle public comment, speakers should be aware that if statements violate the rights of others under the law of defamation or invasion of privacy, the speaker may be held legally responsible. If the speaker is unsure of the legal ramifications of what they're about to say, the district urges them to consult first with a legal advisor. Can I ask why the superintendent was allowed to publicly call me a liar and spreader of misinformation at the last meeting, but was not stopped by the board president? Another case of elected officials that operate in an environment of it is good for thee, but not for we. Let everyone be aware of your lack of desire to follow your governing documents when you find them inconvenient. We want elected officials that do the right thing all the time, not just when they can be legally held responsible. Apparently at MPS, bullying starts at the top. Thank you.
Will Zablocki. Good evening, Will. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Mine's gonna be a little bit short tonight. Actually, maybe I'm not suspected, but I'm just here to express my appreciation for the BPA, the Business Professionals of America, and the DECA programs at Midland and Dow High. When I was in high school, I participated in BPA, and I would credit it significantly towards directing me into my current career. And I see in the communique from today, there was DECA had success in their competitions, also being a judge for the state competition for BPA. I did see recently that we have a lot of students that are going on to the national competition in Dallas. That's actually the one that I went to. I think Phil may participate in that also. And so I just wanted to congratulate those students and just ask you guys to consider, any ways you can additionally support those programs. I think they're good for our students that are going into that business and technology area. Thank you.
Thank you. And last on the list, we have Rob Johnston. Good evening, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
So, over the past several months, we've been meeting here, and some people say things that others agree with, some disagree with. But at the end of it, I think everybody's kind of saying the same thing. They want more transparency. They want more actual conversations about the subjects at hand. We just really want to be able to have an open dialogue. This part where I get to talk and nobody can talk to me is kind of ridiculous. And there's no format for that anywhere that I'm aware of where we can actually have real dialogue and actually have a real conversation about things that are concerning to this lady or to that gentleman. I challenge you guys to maybe start that, maybe once a quarter. That'd be great. Also, DeAndre, great presentation. You spoke very well, and I'd love to be on one of those groups. Talk to me after the meeting? Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and that'll bring our request to address the board to a close, and we will move on to item number 5, Administrative Services, where we have committee minutes that are going to be read by Mr. Frazee.
Correct. The Administrative Services Committee met February 23rd, 2022. We had one topic for discussion. That was Thrun Law Firm Policy Service. Our committee met virtually with a member of the Thrun Law Firm to discuss and ask questions regarding the Thrun Policy Service, including administrative guidelines and forms. Discussion took place regarding pricing, annual updates, implementation, and more. The next administrative meeting will be scheduled as needed.
Okay, thank you. Next up, item 6, CIA. We have study committee minutes that are going to be read by Lynn.
The CIA Study Committee met on February 28th, and the first topic we discussed was Project Lead the Way. Corey Sperling provided an overview of the Project Lead the Way High School Engineering Program and provided a tour of the H.H. Dow High School classroom and lab. Students discussed their projects and overall experience in the program with board members. Next, DeAndre talked about the equity audit and provided an overview of the audit report from Insight Education. The overview included strengths, needs, and recommendations in all 5 domains of the audit, and we saw that tonight. And we adjourned at 2:45 on that date.
Thank you, Lynn. Moving on, item 7, facilities, finance, facilities, and operations. We have first up is FFO minutes, read by Mr. Lauterbach.
Thank you, Scott. The committee met on March 7th, 2022. First item on the agenda was the equity audit. DeAndre Hogan and Penny Miller Nelson presented an overview of the MPS equity audit findings to the committee. The January financials were reviewed. There were no significant variances of note. Bids were solicited for graphing calculators to be utilized in secondary math courses. Administration will bring forward recommendations for the equipment to the January Board of Education meeting. I think we need to fix that. I think that should be the March meeting.
Yep, nope, guys, that was accurate in the meeting. The intent was January, and we had to rebid to get the right pricing, which I think Brian might have brought that up last meeting, but those minutes are accurate as it was presented, if
On
that
March
matters.
7th?
Yeah, Mike's right. We actually bid it, and then we had to go out and rebid it. Because we had a
So
discrepancy
in
in
that
what
meeting,
people
those
were
minutes
trying to sell us
accurate. That
versus
was
what
our
we
intent.
wanted.
We just didn't meet it for you.
That's correct. Yep. We intended to bring it to,
The way it's written sounds.
yeah, we intended to bring it to the
because it says
January meeting. We had to
administration
rebid it, and so it's coming to the meeting this evening.
Okay,
Yeah. I understand.
tonight, the March meeting.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Noted.
all right, thank you. The food service bids, administration will bring an award recommendation for various food service equipment items to the March Board of Education meeting. Procurement of items in timely manner continues to be a challenge for the department. Construction bids coming at March Board of Education meeting, bid package 22-207, stadium LED lights, tuck pointing and fencing throughout the district. MCV personal property values were discussed. Midland Cogeneration Venture petition to move personal property values amongst owned parcels that are subject to different tax rates. The value shift affects the past 3 tax years. A reconciliation process between MPS, MCV, and the state will occur in the late spring or early summer. The Midland Public Schools will not lose revenue, but the timing of the scenario may affect budget numbers if the transactions cross fiscal years. The final item on the agenda was 2022-2023 employee compensation. Feedback was solicited on compensation rates and salary structures for the 22-23 school year, and our next meeting will be Monday, April 4th at 5 p.m.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to get into item 7.2, which kicks off a series of 9 action items, beginning with the budget amendment. Mr. Bruton.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate the opportunity to present our first budget amendment of the year for you. This may seem like it's a little bit later than usual, but actually, this is the norm. For the past 2 years, because there have been such abnormal budget fluctuations, Superintendent Sherrill directed us to bring those budget amendments to you earlier in the year. So they were done in January the past 2. This brings us back to what our traditional cycle is. This traditional cycle more reflects our ability to give you more accurate numbers because there were not such huge variances from where we started to where we are now. So with that, we'll get into where our timelines are right now. This is our first budget revision for the year. We will be having an earlier session to our next Board of Education meeting. I believe we start a half hour early, and I'll deliver to you the budget workshop. The budget workshop, as a reminder, is a recap of where we stand as a district financially. It's more of a history lesson and our current status, and a very first look at what our future projections are of what the next fiscal year's budget may look like. So we'll tackle that next month. In June, we have 2 Board of Education meetings. Our first one is planned for the 6th. At that meeting, we will bring to you what our proposed 22-23 budget is and have the public hearing on that. And we will ask for your approval of that budget at our meeting, the second meeting of the month on the 20th. And we will also bring to you at that meeting a second amendment to this year's budget as well, too. We are now in the cycle where we are having meetings that kind of overlap internally, where we are trying to revise this current fiscal year, but also working on developing next fiscal year's budget as well, too. So I am going to save a lot of the finer detail on enrollment for our budget workshop. I promise you that we'll get into 3 or 4 slides that talk about our enrollment. If you remember last year, I said that our projection models did not account for pandemic conditions. And so this year, actually, our projections, I think, were the closest that they've been in the past many, many years. We missed our enrollment projection by 2, which for us, we like accuracy, but we really wish that we had missed it in our favor, right? That we would have more students than predicted, but actually our predictions came very true. hence leading to the low amount of adjustments that you're going to see tonight. So those small notes that you see down in there, don't get lost in those numbers. I promise during the budget workshop, I'll go through what the impact on those specific numbers are, and we'll dive deeper into MPS enrollment, how it was affected by that pandemic, certain different formulas the state used, and we can flush that all out then. When we bring to you the budget, remember that we are building the budget for the next fiscal year starting now. So we are making predictions on what our state revenues are going to be, what our enrollments are, what our staffing levels are going to be. And so the timing in the state funding information that comes to us provides explicit challenges in building for you an accurate budget. In terms of the foundation allowance, it actually came in a little bit higher than we had expected, and that's reflected in your revenues this evening. There were two major curveballs that came at us that are going to affect the numbers that you see tonight. It doesn't have an overall huge net impact on our position in this budget, but it changes how the money comes to us and how we have to account for it. The first has to do with a major legislative change to the hold harmless tax code. And if you remember, in the fall, I brought to you a tax adjustment that reflected the changes in that, meaning that more of the burden of the hold harmless millage fell on the state than it did our taxpayers. We didn't lose revenue. It simply shifted where those dollars were coming from. That changed our budgets by a couple of $1 million and where we thought the dollars were going to come from. And then ESSER grant planning. As you heard Penny and I talk about earlier this evening, we had to forecast last May what we were going to spend our ESSER dollars on for this year. Our forecasts were not accurate. They were not accurate because we had not gone through the planning phase. We had categorized dollars in different areas, and in loose terms, we had said, well, we have 2 years to spend it. We're probably going to spend about half of it. Threw it out there as a guess, and this budget now reflects the actuals of when we're going to spend those dollars. Phil, you had talked earlier about when we're planning. This is now going to show when those dollars are going to be spent this year, and then we'll build the next into the next fiscal year, so it'll become much more accurate for you. So you're going to see shifts in revenue in the budget that was attached in your board packet. I'm reporting out to you just some of the higher level ones. These look like some pretty big numbers when it comes to shifts in categoricals. When it's all said and done, we are realizing about $5.87 million in revenue than we had originally anticipated. Where did those revenues come from? Well, they came from a higher per pupil allotment than we thought that we were going to get. We also got a higher retirement rate. Reimbursement, which is that 147C MIPSERS rate cap dollars, about $1.8 million. We realized higher revenues in our special education transfers from the ESA. Some of the property values came in a little bit higher, meaning we realized higher revenues from those as well too. And some of our carryover dollars from 31A are now built into this budget as well too. When you see the brackets at the bottom, meaning that this is a reduction in our anticipated revenues, you'll see listed down there the majors, ESSER 3 and local property taxes. The reason ESSER 3 looks like such a big dollar amount, that's because, like I said before, we were guessing, we're probably going to spend about half of it in this fiscal year. And as again, you heard earlier this evening, we just started the hiring process after the holidays. So we're not going to be spending as many ESSER 3 dollars as we had anticipated. We'll be spending down ESSER 2 dollars at a higher rate.
Brian, I think it's important to set the tone when you say guessing. So remember, we adopt our budget before June 30, and we received the state budget later that summer. So when he talks about estimating, that's all that was available to do because the state budget wasn't sent to us prior to you legally had to adopt your budget.
And to build a little bit further on that, I think educated guessing is probably more of a quantifiable term. Last May, if you remember, we had added a lot of additional staff to be able to pull off virtual options, in-person options for those that had wanted it. And so we had built a lot of our expenditure lines into additional staffing, not knowing where the pandemic is going to take us and what conditions we're going to be as well too. The local property tax piece that you see at a 2.2 negative is because that is the hold harmless amount that we are not collecting from our taxpayers that we are now realizing from the state of Michigan instead. So again, not a huge overall change in the dollar amount, but where it's coming from is much more significant. In expenditures, we are adding around 6.98 or just under $7 million to this budget. The bulk of these expenditure additions are for instructional salaries and benefits, just below half of that. For this year, we've had to make a couple of structural changes to be able to adapt to market conditions. Some of the most significant are in the addition of benefits and wages to our hourly staff to be able to recruit and retain talent. We have added many different packages for those employee groups, and we did another fall wage adjustment for those employee groups as well too, to be able to bring our salaries into competitive ranges to be able to again recruit and retain. We've also added additional staff as well too, per some of our ESSER plans, but also to adapt to some of the needs that we have identified. There have been in-out exchanges with 31A, meaning that we know that we're going to have an additional $350 31A, but we have expenditures aligning to that. And UAAL rates came in a little bit higher than had been anticipated for acronyms, and I know Mr. Shiro doesn't like us expanding upon those without saying them. Unfunded actuarial accrued liability. Fancy way of saying that we have to pay an obligation on top, and I can get way deep into that if someone wants to have a cup of coffee someday on what it is. But that rate change is about 0.5% higher, which is about $1.7 million more than what was originally anticipated. And then the federal grant offsets, I'd already explained that. We are reducing our expected amount of expenditures for those federal grants to align with the plan that Penny laid out for you this evening. So when you all flesh it out and all of those numbers come through and into play, it changes our net position or our net prediction in this budget by about $500,000. When you add the almost $6 million in revenues, offset it with about $7 million in expenditures, we are predicting that it will only have an impact to the negative of about $500,000 at this time. If the math isn't adding up in your head, that's because we are changing our estimated variance prediction. Quick reminder, variance for us is the amount of money at the end of the year that we didn't spend that we had planned on. We went back and took a very deep dive into our historical variances, and our historical variances have been averaging in the 3% range. So we wanted to give you a more accurate prediction. It's still on the conservative side, but more accurate prediction of what we believe that budget variance is going to be. So when this is all over and done, our anticipated shortfall this year is coming in right around $1.7 million. Our prediction at the beginning of the year is not that far off from where we are right now. We are trending and tracking a little bit closer to anticipated expenditures than we have in the past, meaning that we don't believe that we're going to see a 5 or 6 or 7% variance, but we'll have that much more refined for you when we come to the June Board of Education meeting. At the bottom, I will flesh out a lot better for you when it comes to the April Board of Education meeting, but when those numbers look a little bit off to you, and you say you're predicting you're going to lose money, but your unassigned fund balance went up, that's because of what we predicted our fund balance was going to be last June. The audit came in with a higher than expected variance, so where we started, that starting point moved, meaning that we're reducing from a higher starting point than what's shown there. I'll have some charts that make that easier to understand at the April Board of Education workshop that'll show you where your fund balance is, which is at still a very healthy rate. With all of this flushing through, our prediction for the total fund balance at the end of the year will be right around 28.2%. Roughly a 4% variance would balance this budget, which is about 2% beyond where I'm predicting for you this evening. So our key drivers moving ahead, as I said, we will continue to work on refining this budget for you and bring you another revision at the second June meeting on the 20th. We will be working on the 22-23 budget in the meantime. We are working again with our enrollment consultant to get numbers, and I know Mr. Sherrill is tracking this very closely to build those in. We are working on our personnel costs, staffing. Our first meeting is tomorrow to start staffing for the new year. We start with our secondary schools, and we will then take what we believe are our anticipated retirements, hiring rates, UAL rates, medical rates, et cetera, put all those puzzle pieces together to try and develop what that fiscal year 23 budget is. Our busy season is now. We are on a pure sprint to the end of the school year, and we'll continue to work very diligently to try and bring you the most accurate numbers that we can for the revision of this fiscal year's budget, but also for next year's fiscal year budget as well, too. And with that, I would entertain any questions that you might have.
I would add, if you recall, traditionally we come in balanced to the good since I've been here, but our fund balance was high enough that balance would be a good thing and spending a little wouldn't be all bad. But I think, our goal is still to come in with balance, but with the learning loss and capturing kids up and the extra expenditures for support for personnel, we were willing to dip if we had to because of the size of our fund balance.
Any questions? Okay, Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
I will accept the motion to adopt the budget amendment.
I move that item 7.2, the budget amendment number 1 be approved.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Roush. Any additional discussion regarding item 7.2? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, we have item 7.3. This is bid package 22-207. Brian?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll take them. Drink of water because this is going to be a sprint here. All right, so we're bringing to you bid package 22-207, which includes converting the current lights at the Midland Community Stadium to LED. We are recommending that you award the contract to Ted's Electric Service of Rhodes, Michigan for the amount of $284,985. If approved, this project will be paid for by Series 2 bond funds.
I move approval of item 7.3, awarding the bid package 22-207 to Ted's Electric Service in the amount of $284,985. Support.
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Hatfield. I have one question. What is the projected cost savings with the conversion to LED? Is there?
We'd have to go get it. Brad maybe will speak better than me, but
I guess, yeah.
the whole district will be LED by the end of the summer, which is a cost savings, and it does go into the energy report where we begin to track that performance part of it. And so this wasn't in the performance, but there's a formula in there where they don't get credit for it, but it'll reduce it. I don't know that I know that on LED. Brad, do you at all? Approximately.
Well, because it's a stadium, it's more intermittent usage, so you don't have the straight formulas, but it'll be benefit, especially depending on the age of the lamps. You get into lumen depreciation, so the lights are not as bright every year that you turn them on. And then with LED, there isn't the lumen depreciation. It's linear all the way across. So less electricity, less maintenance.
Maintenance, big one.
More light. So
pretty costly on getting on these lights because it's also on the hill. They spend when they're replaced, they're pretty costly to replace. So
Will it be done over the summer?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, 7.4. Brian, continue?
Yep, thank you. Bids were received and a tabulation was provided for you for the purchase of 25 TI-84 graphing calculator teacher packs and 45 TI-30X2S scientific calculators. We recommend issuing the purchase order to Underwood Distributing Company of Grand Rapids, Michigan in the amount of $33,598.70. And if approved this evening, general funds will be utilized for this purchase.
I move that we accept item 7.4, calculator purchase.
Support. Motion by Mr. Hatfield, support by Mr. Frazee. Any additional discussion regarding item 7.4? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, 7.5, masonry repair bid, sorry. Mr. Brew.
Yep. Thank you. Bids were accepted and a tabulation was again provided for you for masonry repair throughout Midland Public Schools. Tuck pointing and brick replacement will occur at 11 different MPS buildings within this package. And we recommend awarding that package to Davenport Masonry Incorporated of Mason, Michigan for $129,600. If approved this evening, the district will utilize capital improvement funds for this project.
Okay.
Move adoption of 7.5, awarding the masonry repair bid to Davenport Masonry in the amount of $129,600.
Support?
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Roush. Any further discussion regarding item 7.5?
Just one question for Brian on this one. Jefferson in the breakdown looks, I mean, that's where all the savings was for Davenport compared to the other. Is that actually
Yeah.
a variance, or is that
So you
just lower bid?
lower bid, and Brad's asked that question for building by building, and in this case, the amount is so low that they would not allow us to break it out by building and choose different, plus the management of that.
Yeah, what I was asking more just, is the scope of work the same, or did they just think they can do it for cheaper?
Each building is unique.
Okay.
As we walked them and we looked at them all, so some is just simple mortar issues, some are brick, full wall brick almost, issues. Northeast gets a significant amount, but do recall, we aren't going to repair all of it, as that building's got a structural issue in it, and someday it'll end its life, so.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Scott, I may add that when
sorry.
we're using bond funds, that's all bond savings that we're using, and when we're using capital funds, we have that all planned into the capital fund budget.
Okay, and just to be clear, there's no opposition to this motion? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. Next up, 7.6, fencing award bid. Mr. Bruton.
Thank you. The district also accepted bids to provide fencing work throughout the Midland Public Schools. Repair, removal, and/or replacement will occur at Dow High, Jefferson Middle School, Midland High, Northeast, and Siebert Elementary. We recommend awarding this contract to Action Traffic Maintenance of Flint, Michigan for the amount of $397,669. If approved this evening, the district plans to use capital improvement funds for this project.
Thank you. I'll accept the motion.
I move adoption of 7.6, the fencing award bid to Action Traffic Maintenance in the amount of $397,669.
Support?
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Hatfield. Any additional discussion for item 7.6?
I see that we only had 2 bids on it.
Yeah. We had a real hard time getting fencing bids, and think about that, February, March, summer work, the money of the fencing contractors were already out, so we're getting down when projects are smaller, and we were pushing this timeline, if you recall, and so it's about when we get out to the market early, we get them good, Brad, and then this one's just a smaller one, and then it's hodgepodge all over, repair, replacement, some we're removing, because anytime you have more fence, it's not necessarily a good thing if we don't necessarily need them, because mowing, trash, replacement in the future, but, yeah.
How does that number compare to what Barton Mel thought it should cost?
I believe, Brian, you correct me if I'm wrong, Rick felt that it was still in line with what they've seen across the board on it. So they still felt it was a good bid, even though we only had 2. It was a competitive bid.
Last question. This is a great start. What does it take to continue the broad brush across the district to replace all the fences that need to be replaced? Any general idea? Another one of these of similar size, or?
Yeah, we can go back and ask Mike Mogenberg and Rick. They walked, so on this one, they probably did prioritize, but they walked the entire district looking at fencing out there. So I think they felt they got our biggest needs, but yes, depends on how you look at fencing, right? I mean, you and I think look at it similar. You walk around the stadium and the exterior of that fence is probably darn near original stuff that's been painted. So at some point it becomes a bit of an eyesore. I would still say some fencing, some roofing, and some curbing. Curb replacements is still a pretty big issue on the exterior that we still need to work on.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, 7.7, food service equipment. Mr. Bruton.
Thank you. And just to preface, the next 3 action item requests that we're bringing to you are all food service related. And so the next 3 will all be procured utilizing food service funds if approved by the board this evening. So the first request is the bids were accepted for food service equipment to be utilized throughout kitchens and cafeterias all throughout the Midland Public Schools. We attached for you a very, very comprehensive list of that equipment. It includes items such as shelves, coolers, serving counters, refrigerators, steamers, display cases, ice makers, and a bunch of other items that you saw. Again, that complete list was attached to your Board of Education packet. We are recommending issuing that purchase order to Stafford Smith Incorporated of Bay City, Michigan for the amount of $493,510.
And I might add, remember, food service fund is very restricted, and they're controlled by the USDA, and you have to spend it only in that specific area. But our food service fund is very healthy.
Move
Okay.
adoption of 7.7, the award of the purchase order for food service equipment to Stafford Smith, Inc. of Bay City.
Support.
$493,510.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mrs. Baker. Any further discussion regarding item 7.7?
Hey, Brian, there's a caveat in the PO for unforeseen transportation costs.
Yes, sir.
Is that international shipping or is that all domestic?
I don't know the answer to that, Phil. I'll have to look into that and follow up with you.
Just when I read that, if there's any international, that could be a red flag, but if it's domestic, I guess I'm not as.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Yeah, okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, 7.8, Mr. Bruton.
Thank you. We are seeking to deliver a purchase order to Inacomp TSG of Southfield, Michigan for $29,001 to provide replacement devices for the point of sale locations throughout the Midland Public Schools. This pricing was provided from the State of Michigan Rebid, and we were assisted in procuring that from Mr. Diedzik of our Technology Department. And as a reminder, this, of course, will be food service funds, again, for this purchase if approved.
Okay.
Make a motion to approve item 7.8.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Roush, support by Mr. Hatfield. Any additional discussion regarding 7.8? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, item 7.9, Mr. Bruton.
Thank you. The last of the food service requests. You all have generously approved for us the purchase of furniture at every single MPS building over the course of the past couple of years, either through the bond or through food service funds. This is the conclusion of that. So we are fulfilling the very last building, and we are re-equipping the pre-primary center with this request for furniture. In addition to the pre-primary center furniture, as a part of this, we are also asking for the approval of upgraded condiment counters and trash receptacles throughout MPS cafeterias as well, too. We are recommending issuing this purchase order to Great Lakes Furniture Supply of Holland, Michigan for $67,290.
Move adoption of 7.9, awarding the purchase order for food service furniture to Great Lakes Furniture Supply in the amount of $67,290. Support.
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Hatfield. Any additional discussion regarding item 7.9?
How long does this take to turn around? I think we had a meeting at Dow High a couple months ago, and they still don't have their cafeteria furniture, so
Brian,
how long does this take?
Well, in keeping politeness, longer than we would like.
Okay.
Procurement for all of these has been an interesting venture, Brad. We are hoping that Dow High Furniture comes in by April or May. That's really what we're hoping. And if this comes in by the end of this fiscal year, we'd probably be pretty surprised. We hope that it does, but we have learned throughout the course of the pandemic that the supply chain is very, very snarled, and it doesn't seem to be unsnarling any quicker.
Okay.
So I don't want to give you a false timeline because we're hoping.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We're not desperate. I mean, you saw, it's old furniture.
Yep, it is.
But it works, still functioning, so we'll be all right to get there.
They'll be happy when it comes. It's going to look great.
Since we're paused for a second, Scott, do you want to make a motion to extend them?
Yeah, what time do you guys think?
It'd be safe to extend to 10, and if we're done before that, we're done before it.
Okay.
Make a motion to extend the meeting till 10 o'clock.
Support. Motion by Mr. Hatfield, support by Mr. Roush. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're extended.
I don't support, but I'm.
Getting back to 7.9, any additional discussion? All in favor for 7.9, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Before we get to 7.10, Brian, once these expenditures are complete with our last 7.9, 7.8, 7.7, where does our food service fund stand financially?
Still extremely healthy, with still being quite concerned that we will run into issues with having an excess fund balance by the end of the year. You're only allowed to have 3 months of expenditures in your fund balance. With our current spend down plan, if it all arrives, we'll be okay, but it is very difficult to get these items, and if they don't come in time, then we could run into that once more.
And the rationale on that is we're still being reimbursed from the USDA at a higher rate and feeding all children. I think higher rate still, right, too?
That's correct.
And all children, and we have been doing so since the start of the pandemic. I have heard that may stop next February, and we'll go back to the regular rate and only qualifiers. So we'll see.
Well, I have one more question, just following that. If these items don't come in time and we lose the funding because we didn't spend it in time, and then they come in later, how are those items then covered?
Yeah, for clarification, Scott, I'm sorry if I misled you. You don't lose the funding. We just get a red check mark on our audit saying that you have not spent this down. The rule says you can only have 3 months, and you have to submit a spend down plan to the state of Michigan as what is your solution.
And when these don't arrive and he's got the plan, he just has to
Our
notify
plan is
him.
already approved. What we do is go to the state and say,
All right.
we believe we're in fiscal alignment. Here's the items we've ordered. Their forgiveness levels of it, that they're auditors, and they have a number to look at. When it doesn't match, then their excuse is that my van that I ordered last year still hasn't arrived. They don't care. So it is what it is right now. We're not wasting money. We're being strategic about our decisions and what we're getting. We could just go out and frivolously spend, but we're making sure that we're getting equipment that's going to meet the needs of these cafeterias for long term. So I'd much rather do that, spend it wisely, and if I get a red check mark, I never want to bring that to you all, but I ask for forgiveness on our behalf of the issues with the supply chains.
All right, thank you. Moving on to 7.10, gifts.
One gift requiring your action to accept this evening, that's a gift that came from Dow Chemical through the Great Lakes Bay Invitational, and this was $20,000 in support of the Go Green Club.
Okay, take a motion to accept.
So moved. Support.
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Roush. Any additional discussion? Item 7.10. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next up is information only. Mr. Bruton.
Thank you. Tonight, we'd like to acknowledge 22 gifts totaling $24,401.90. These gifts, as you see listed in your agenda, range from support for BPA, DECA, robotics, the A.H. Nicholas innovation teams, and many other miscellaneous items. We'd like to express our gratitude to each of these generous donors this evening.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have Human Resources. This is item 8, if you're following along in the agenda. Study Committee Chair, Mr. Roush, with minutes.
We didn't meet since the last meeting.
Oh.
Just
Okay. Then Mr. Jester, item 8.1.
Thank you. Good evening. As is typical for March, we have a larger than usual list of retirees. It just coincides with our early retirement notification window for the district the previous month. And I would note that we have 28 staff here, so it's a little bittersweet. We have some great staff that we will be losing, but congratulations to them on their retirement. So the following have announced their retirement with the effective dates listed, so I'll try to quickly go through these. Jennifer Coppins, currently Assistant Principal at H.H. Dow, effective June 30th. Tammy Dubshinsky, Administrative Assistant, Woodcrest Elementary, effective June 30th. Doug Bradford, Counselor, H.H. Dow High School, effective May 31st. Eric Kraus, teacher, Midland High School, effective May 31st. Mark Jungle, teacher, Jefferson Middle School, effective May 31st. Lynn Verdusco, teacher, Woodcrest Elementary, effective May 31st. Brian Brown, teacher, Northeast Middle School, effective May 31st. Joel McCusco, teacher, Midland High School, effective May 31st. Robin Bott, teacher, Northeast Middle School, effective May 31st. Jim Rupert, facilities manager, maintenance, effective June 30th. Lori Monville, paraprofessional, Northeast Middle School, effective May 27th. Barbara St. Louis, teacher, Jefferson Middle School, effective May 31st. Georgina Leach, teacher, Midland High School, effective May 31st. Kim Noe, teacher, Plymouth Elementary, effective May 31st. Lisa Holman, teacher, Woodcrest Elementary, effective May 31st. Christine Swan, teacher, Jefferson Middle School, effective May 31st. Cynthia Young, pause on that one, communications manager, administration, effective June 30th. Barbara Stevenson, teacher, Chestnut Hill Elementary, effective May 31st. Tammy Brown, administrative assistant, Northeast Middle School, effective June 30th. Lori Lee, teacher, Jefferson Middle School, effective May 31st. Sandra Justice, teacher, Northeast Middle School, effective May 31st. Jim Mativa, teacher, Jefferson Middle School, effective May 31st. Jeff Dietrich, social worker, Special Services Department, effective May 31st. Janine Steinbrenner, paraprofessional, Adams Elementary, effective May 27th. Paul Tolley, lead support specialist in the technology department, effective May 27th. Johnny Chapman, teacher, Midland High School, effective May 31st. Nancy Steve, paraprofessional, post-secondary, effective May 27. And then Lori Pritchard, currently supervisor of programs at the JCC, effective June 30th.
All right, thank you. I guess we can continue to item 8.2.
Thank you. It's with our greatest regrets and deepest sympathy that the board and staff, are thinking of the following families. We have lost 2 staff members over the past month, or former staff members rather. Craig Hawkins passed away February 24th, 2022. Craig worked as a longtime counselor in multiple buildings, most recently at Midland High School. He retired in 2019 after 23 years of service. And then also the passing of Miss Sally Brown, passed away February 15th, 2022. Sally worked as a longtime substitute teacher for the district. She resigned in 2019 after 54 years as a substitute teacher.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, next up is item 9.1. This is letters from the Board of Education, and those people and entities are listed there in the agenda. Similarly, for item 9.2, letters to the Board of Education, we just have a couple there from Mark Hoon. Next up, item 10.1, these are our remaining scheduled meetings for the Board of Education. Please note the April 18th, 2022 budget workshop starting at 6:30 p.m. And that will bring us to a closed session with item 11, and we will need to do a roll call vote.
Correct.
We need a motion.
You need a motion, a second, and roll call.
I move that we go into closed session to discuss an employee complaint pursuant to section 8(1)A of the Michigan Open Meetings Act, being Michigan compiled laws 15.268(1)A.
Support.
Motion by Mr. Lauterbach, support by Mr. Roush.
All right, roll call vote.
Scott, I got a quick question for you. If Mike has comments, nobody's gonna come back after our closed, so I didn't know if you wanted to do that.
I'm not gonna this
You're
time,
not?
to save time. I only had 2 small ones,
Okay.
and you kind of know what they are, so we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Brad, bud.
Thank you, Brad.
All right, President McFarland,
Yes.
Vice President Roush,
Yes.
Secretary Hatfield, yes. Treasurer Lauterbach, Yes. Member Baker,
Yes.
Member Blazy,
Yes.
Member Frizzy.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. We are now in closed session. Folks, thank you for sticking with us tonight. We appreciate your comments, and we'll see you in a month. For those of you who are traveling,
They can stay till we come out of closed session.
yes,
Yeah, they can get.
you're welcome back to hear us close the meeting. But for those of you who are traveling, please have safe travels over spring break. We'll see you next month.
Gonna wait on Dave. He's for recording. He's got to get it back up, Scott.
Okay.
You give us the go when you're ready, Dave.
Are you ready to hit record?
Back on?
Not yet.
Is board ready?
Yes?
Okay. Okay, so ready? Go ahead, go live. No,
We're live.
We're ready, Scott.
Go ahead, Scott, we're ready.
Okay, we are back in session. Next up is item 12, an action item. This is the employment resignation for Amy Bushy. I'll accept the motion.
Make a motion that the board approve the employment resignation for Amy Bushy.
Motion by Mr. Roush, support by Mr. Hatfield. Any further discussion regarding item 12? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay,
Record should reflect I abstained from the vote
noted.
discussion.
Okay, thank you. All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. Next up is our study discussion session. Any points of clarification on anything that was discussed tonight? I thought we did a great job asking questions. If there is nothing, Mike had already alluded to not having any comments.
Just
And
want to reinforce how appreciative of the central staff I am. Every time we come in here, it's just a mountain of work that they've cranked through in a deliberate, strategic way, and it makes our lives very easy. So, thank you.
agreed, thank you.
And I'd like to thank the individuals who show up month after month to share their thoughts with us. We appreciate it.
Okay.
And
next.
one other, Scott.
Sure.
Also wanted to thank Dow Chemical. There was there's the gift there, and then also for supporting us by paying for the equity audit, and we couldn't be who we are or do the things we do without their help. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right, you guys gonna let me get to it or not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, item 14. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Support? All in favor?
Support.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.